Oregon football is around the halfway mark in fall camp. So today we're going out to Eugene to get some updates. And we're back like we never left. Oregon fans, what's going on? How we living? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast, your premier podcast for all things Oregon recruiting and Oregon football. It is Friday, August 18th, and we got a great episode in store for you guys today. Just in case you're new here, I'm your host, Max Torres, publisher and lead editor of Ducks Digest, covering the Oregon Ducks over on Fan Nation, part of the Sports Illustrated Network. I'm not solo today. I'm usually solo, but I got my good friend Erik Skopil in here today. He is the football and women's basketball beat reporter for 247's Duck Territory and a fellow Zag. How we doing, man? Thanks for being here.
Yeah, no, good. Today's an off day for football, so squeezing you in a pretty busy schedule right now.
Yeah, no, it is super busy, and you guys are nose to the grindstone with fall camp right now. If you guys haven't read a bunch of Erik's stuff, he does great work, so he's certainly worth a follow and all that stuff. So we'll get to some of that towards the back end of the episode where you can find him and everything. But yeah, we're titling this episode a fall camp check-in. Like I said in the intro, around the halfway mark, your boots on the ground in Eugene. So I wanted to kind of pick your brain and just start things off with what's kind of caught your eye out there in fall camp.
Well, just up front, Axis is what it's been in the past or similar. Max, I think you know that you covered the team in 2020, 21, I think. So you've got a little bit of a sense of what that's like. And, I can't say I've seen a ton of competition reps or a ton of 7-on-7 or 11-on-11. I haven't even seen any of those yet in fall. So some of that is limited. In terms of what's catching my eye, I think just, this is kind of, again, probably more broad strokes than I wish it was, because I wish I could come out here and be like, man, they're implementing this in Stein's offense, or man, check out what so-and-so has been doing, in these drills. I just don't have that. But I think from a how bodies have changed perspective, and we did get heights and weights for the first time in fall camp yesterday, which was an exciting day, I know, for Oregon fans, because they've been clamoring to see. There's like 40 new players, and we didn't really have a sense of the size for some of them, or at least what they were listed as. But I think at linebacker in particular, it stands out. Just the shift that they've undergone, I guess, this offseason. A year ago, I don't think anybody really thought linebacker was going to be the weakness of that defense, and it was. I don't think there's much question. Justin Flo didn't pan out. Noah Sewell was kind of dinged up, and I don't think he was a great fit for the system. Jeff Bossa was playing at like 212 pounds and playing like 50 snaps a game. Like there just were kind of some issues that they had, I think, from a personnel perspective, and it's pretty clear what the prototype of what they're looking for is, and that's a player who's versatile, who's 225 to 230 pounds, and you see that reflected in the weights. I mean, Jeff Boss, I mentioned, he was playing at like 212 last year. I think he's up close to 230. Jamal Hill was playing at a similar weight last year at nickel and at safety, and now he's moving up to linebacker, and I think he's listed at 227. Same thing with like Devin Jackson, Connor Soley, the transfer from Arizona State. Justin Jacobs is bigger. I think he's closer to like 240. But just as a whole, like these are, I think, smaller in size than what you used to see the last couple of years, especially when you had like a Noah Sewell running around in like 255, 260. But just the pure athleticism that you see, and well, at least I anticipate we'll see, because we haven't seen a ton of it in person. I think that's the thing that stands out, and I think that's a really big deal. I personally felt pretty good about the front last year. I think that continues to be a strength. The secondary we can get into, there's still a lot of moving pieces. I don't really know exactly what to make of. But just at linebacker, the types of athletes and the size of the players, like I think that's really encouraging. And I think I probably speak for most people who are tuned in or following the program closely. Like improvements on defense were needed after last year, pretty clearly. Offensively, I think the Ducks probably did enough to win just about every game they played, except for the first one. But defensively, there were clearly issues. And I think some of that looks like it's getting rectified. Haven't seen enough in practice to really say for sure, but just in terms of how players have changed their bodies, like you get a good sense of like, this is the type of linebacker that Dan really coached at Georgia. These are the types of body types and athletes that he had and used there. Now he has some of those at his disposal at Oregon, and we'll kind of see what that looks like, I guess.
Yeah, we'll get into some of those other defensive groups later on in today's episode, but the linebackers core is a great place to start because, like you said, there were some good pieces there last year and in years past, but it really didn't seem like a productive group, a reliable group, a deep group. Choose whatever adjective you want, but it seems like it's kind of going towards that. And I think it's a group that I've grown more confident in, or at least intrigued by at the very least, over the course of the offseason, seeing some of the pieces that they added. But with I think it's probably safe to say that you're looking at likely Justin Jacobs and Jeff Bossa as some of your starting kind of caliber guys along the inside. But bringing Jamal Hill down from the secondary is certainly an interesting move. I think Tosh Lapoy said if he had a time machine, he would have done it sooner. So that was a notable quote. But he's looking big. A lot of those guys have tweaked their bodies. I'm hearing that Connor Soley looks like he's kind of been as advertised from some of the people that I've spoken with around the program. But just in the course of an offseason, I think that this is a group that not only needs to improve, but is looking more and more like it probably can. And to your point, a lot of those guys are maybe fitting Dan Lanning's system and his ideal prototype.
And I think Jamal even said the same thing that Tosh said at media day, which was something to the effect of like, gosh, if I could, I wish I would have done it sooner, because and I always thought, with Jamal, I won't say I had this grand vision that he was a perfect fit to play Mike or Mac, the two inside positions, but I always felt like he was a good fit at nickel just because he was versatile enough in coverage, and then obviously very physically imposing for a defensive back. I mean, he's played at like 5'11", 210 for basically his whole career, and that's a big kid. And so now that he's put on a little added weight, I'm curious to see how that plays. And I agree. I think with your Bossa and Jacobs probably being your starting pair. I've been very critical of Bossa in the past. I'm very curious to see how he
PFF grade.
yeah, you know why. Anybody who knows
I
my
listen to you
shtick.
guys.
Yeah. People know my shtick, and I probably, I don't know if I've been too aggressive in pushing it or not, but it's just like people were looking for trying to find an understanding of why the defense was bad last year, and it became, let's point to this and that, and I didn't necessarily know if people were highlighting the right parts of, like, they just were bad at linebacker across the board, and Jeff was not very good himself. So I'm encouraged by what he can be, just to like focus on Jeff, because he even said, I think it was, yeah, it was down in Las Vegas when I had some one-on-one time with him over lunch at the Pac-12 Media Day, the last Pac-12 Media Day, by the way, Max, no more.
Pac-4.
The Pac-4, yeah, we'll be. I don't think I'll be attending next year's Pac-4 Media Day. But Jeff even said, like, he didn't feel like it was like really an option or like something he could do for another season to play that undersized, because his point is a point that a lot of us have made of, like, he was just too small at times, and you can tell that's not going to be the issue this year for him, I don't think. I mean, there might be matchups where he does face off against guys who blow him up a little bit just because he's still playing at 230, but 230 is a lot different than 210 or 212, and I think we'll see improved play there. And again, there won't be that excuse of, oh, he's just small now. He's changed his body. People have seen photos. I think he's one of the guys who's really done a good job in the weight room. So yeah, I'm curious there. And then, yeah, back to the point of like the starters, like I think those would be my picks, but like there's been a lot of Devin Jackson buzz, and to your point, there's been some Connor Soley buzz, and I think Jamal Hill is super intriguing. Like I wouldn't be surprised. Like all five of those guys, I think, are players that are capable of being contributors. To what level, I don't know, because I haven't seen Justin Jacobs play in Oregon uniform. I haven't really seen Jamal Hill play this position. I haven't seen Connor Soley in Oregon uniform. And Devin Jackson barely played last year. And so Jeff Bossa, of these five guys, is the only one Oregon fans have really been able to tune in and watch play at least this specific spot. So it seems encouraging. I like the direction, like the trajectory feels positive, but who knows? I mean, we might get into we might come out of the game in Lubbock saying, gosh, like we were sold that this was supposed to be an improvement, but it didn't turn out to be. So
Yeah, so we'll see what that group can do. I mean, it obviously got overhauled pretty significantly since the end of last year. You talked about all the departures. Keith Brown heads to Louisville. Harrison Taggart goes back home to BYU. Jackson LeDuc goes back home to UNR to reunite with. Oh my God, I'm totally blanking on his name. Ken Wilson. Thank you. So then they lose those guys, and you bring in the names that we've talked about. So that's a group that has a bunch of potential, but is kind of a question mark, which I think we could also talk about a little bit with some of these other groups on the Oregon defense. So maybe we'll segue into that. Let's talk about the secondary a little bit here, Erik, because they're in a really weird spot where you have a lot of guys that have played a lot of football but haven't really produced at a high level. I'm talking about guys like Triquez Bridges, guys like Steve Stevens, maybe Brian Addison. I think Brian Addison was probably the most productive safety on this Oregon team last year. But you bring in Tysheem Johnson, you bring in Evan Williams for a reason, you bring in Kyrie Jackson and Nico Reed, and then you sign 5 high school corners. To me, that sends a pretty strong message, and not that it's one with any ill intentions, but it seems like that group just really hasn't been getting it done collectively, and they want to do something to change that and make it an impact group, the secondary.
It's the group I have probably the worst feel for right now, in part because it seems like every time one of these players is made available for interviews or we speak with one of the position coaches, I'm learning someone's working at a position I didn't know they were working at. Like, it's just been the trend of like, oh, here's Nico Reed. Oh, he's playing nickel almost as much as he's playing corner. Or here's Tysheem Johnson. Oh, actually, maybe he's going to play deep this year, even though everybody in the spring said he was primarily playing nickel. Like, it just seems like every time we talk to somebody, there's kind of new information being presented. And again, that goes back to some of the limitations that we have as reporters, boots on the ground, have with access. And again, I'm not trying to sit here to be critical, but it's just the facts of the matter of like, I don't have a great sense of what this is going to look like. Like, it's also of, okay, we think Triquez Bridges is returning as a starting corner. I'm probably a little higher on his play than some are. I thought he played pretty darn well down the stretch of last season, and I do think he's capable of being above average starting corner, because I thought he was probably a little bit of that last year, especially like I said down the back half. But like, with Kyrie Jackson here, with Nico Reed here, these are guys who've got starting experiences at other Power 5 schools. I mean, Reed was pretty darn productive at Colorado. I don't think the PFF grades are quite as favorable compared to like Triquez. But then you've got like, what do we do with someone like Jaleel Florence, who I thought had some nice moments last year? He's been working at nickel. What do we do with Kamari Terrell? Same kind of a deal. Sounds like Cole Martin is primarily nickel and safety now. There's just a lot of these moving parts that kind of are hard to figure out. And then to the point you made earlier, like Steve Stevens and Brian Addison, we don't really talk about them very often right now, because the shiny new toy is Tysheem Johnson or Evan Williams or one of these younger guys, one of these younger, more exciting players. So I want to be optimistic. I think collectively there's a lot of talent there. I mean, if you just want to go star chasing and look at the recruiting rankings, like pretty much every kid that was recruited out of high school that's on the roster here, it was like a 4 or a 5-star recruit. And pretty much, I might even mentioned Dante Manning's name, by the way, with those corners earlier. And even the transfers, they might not have been 4 or 5-star recruits out of high school, but I think Tysheem Johnson, Evan Williams, and Kyrie Jackson and Nico Reed are all like guys who were fairly productive college players at their other schools. So, it seems like Oregon has brought in a lot of talent there, but I don't know how it all fits. And it seems like they're trying to figure that out right now. It seems like a couple of things. It seems pretty clear that they want to have as much positional and personnel versatility as possible, so that they are versatile against certain, offensive systems. And, there might be a game where they play a certain personnel group more than others, but it also seems like they're just trying to figure out, like, of those personnel groups, how does everybody fit? Which is why you are seeing and hearing, it sounds like everybody's working at a couple different spots. I think with the exception of Quez and Dante, who it sounds like are just locked into playing corner, from what we've heard. But yeah, it's a group that needs to be better. You look at the conference and you look at the teams Oregon's going to be contending with to try to win a Pac-12 championship. And it's USC and Washington primarily, along with Utah and Oregon State. But those first two have 2 of the 3 or 4 best quarterbacks in the country and a lot of really good receivers to throw to. So Oregon has to improve there. It seems like the talent's good, but to the point I made earlier with linebacker, sort of, it's like I certainly haven't seen enough to know one way or the other, even though there's been a lot of positive reports on a lot of these guys.
We're talking with Erik Skopil of 247's Duck Territory on this episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. If you guys are watching us on YouTube, do me a quick favor and hit that like and subscribe button so that you can stay up to date on what we got going here on the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Erik, I wanted to continue a little bit more on this secondary point. When I talk about guys like Steve Stevens, Triquez Bridges, and Dante Manning, I don't want to, I don't want it to come off to you or even to the audience here that they're subpar or bad players, but I think it's just you're at a point with this Oregon program, with this Oregon defense, where you're looking to take that next step. And there comes a time when you just need to level with guys and bring, like, obviously they're sending the message as far as just we got to have that healthy competition. And if there's guys that we think can elevate our program, we're going to go after them and get them, even if it means you might be losing your job as a guy who's been around for a while. So Nico Reed comes in. Obviously, that's a guy that Demetrius Martin has a lot of familiarity with from his days at Colorado. And then Tyshim Johnson comes in from Ole Miss. These are guys that have produced, pretty effectively at their previous stops. So I think that healthy competition is obviously only going to help, and hopefully for Oregon's sake, elevate that floor. And then the other point I wanted to get to is just the guys that they've brought in from the high school ranks. These are big kids. Like, they don't look like freshmen. I mean, Dalen Austin's at like 6 foot, close to 190 or 95 pounds, maybe even 200. So these are big corners that I think maybe you're not as used to seeing at Oregon, but they're more of that fit, those prototypical guys, those long corners that can run and cover. So there's some reason to be optimistic that these guys can really help get this defense headed in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think I think it's interesting with that position in general, the change we've seen over the last decade and just what you're looking for there. And I think I remember when I was growing up, it really was pretty unusual where you'd have a corner that was taller than 6'1". Like, that just wasn't, you were looking for small, quick guys, in part because I don't think run support and the versatility of that was really something you were expecting. I mean, you didn't expect your corners to be awesome in that area. You weren't blitzing your corners ever. Now you see that stuff with a lot more regularity. And I thought, I would think pretty clearly, like, the prototype of what Oregon wants at that position is the guy that just left, which is Christian Gonzalez, who I think everybody thinks sounds like he's done awesome in Patriots camp and has a chance to be one of the better, defensive rookies in the NFL this year. But a guy who's that size and that athleticism, like, isn't particularly easy to find. And it seems like Oregon has a lot of guys that at least have the same body types, whether it be Triquez or Kyrie, who are both 6'3", long arms. Dante Manning isn't quite as tall, but I remember talking to him last year, and his wingspan is like close to 7 feet. Like, he's got a lot of length. You brought up Dalen Austin. Totally. That guy physically stands out. Colin Gill's name doesn't come up a lot. He's playing safety, it sounds like, but he's 6'2", 215 according to the roster, which
heavy.
is just giant. Wasn't expecting that. So yeah, no, I think I mean, the one I guess outlier is Roderick Pleasant, who I think is 5'9", 190 or 185. I can't remember.
180. I think he's 180.
So he's a smaller guy that fits more in the the Thomas Graham kind of body type. I'm trying to think of other players that were kind of similar in size. But gosh, I mean, obviously his speed, you think he can make up for some of that too. But no, it is interesting, and I think what the goal is almost right now is to try to find, and I know this isn't exactly it, but if you're going to play, a nickel defensive back, and you're going to have 5 defensive backs in the field, I think you want to have like 5 guys that are all kind of similar in size, stature, and skill set, just so that you can rotate them as much as possible and have them be in advantageous situations as much as possible, which is why, like, it's possible Oregon starts 2 corners that are really similar size to the kind of safeties they start. It's possible the guy playing nickel, it could be Tyshim Johnson, is like one of the smaller in terms of height players on the field, just because he doesn't have to have that length with who he's covering. But just across the board, I think you are looking at that being the trend, not just at corner, but at all the positions. Like, let's go find 6'2", 6'3", 195, 200-pound guys, put them, as many of them out there as possible, and see how they do. And again, like, you could sell me on 50 different iterations of what the starting secondary looks like right now. Like, and certainly even more for what the second team is. There are a lot of players to look through here. And again, as I said to start when we're talking about this, I don't have a great feel right now, and I'm going to be very curious to see start next month what this looks like against Portland State, but of course even more so against Tech.
Just my final thought on the secondary, and then we'll get to some D line talk. I think back as we kind of talk about just how versatile Oregon's secondary is right now, like moving around guys at a lot of places, having guys that can do a lot of things. That's really helpful. But I wonder how similar the conversation is compared to the versatility that we talked about with the offensive line in the Mario Cristobal era. Guys moving around all the time. At what point did that hurt you and make it hard to get that chemistry? You just said it yourself. You could have 50 iterations of this defense and not know what's best. And I think part of that just comes to where we are in the calendar right now. They haven't been playing that much. So we'll see what works out the best. And we'll get some of these earlier games like Portland State to kind of figure out some of those tweaks. But that was just something that occurred to me. Just like, is it always a benefit to have that much versatility? When is it too much?
Well, there is to me a difference between offensive line rotations, which I was probably more okay with than some people were. I thought at times it worked, at times it didn't. Than there is in the secondary because I guess there are some similarities, but you think about it, like what kind of a body types you want out there when you're playing Utah or when you're playing Oregon State, especially like nickel and at safety, because like one of the things that's been interesting is like talking to like Kamari Terrell a couple of days ago was he was mentioning like, okay, like who does he match up with? Like he's out in the field in a personnel group that's a speed personnel group. Like that's when he's going to play a lot. That's when he's going to fit at nickel because he's only 6'3", 180 pounds or whatever he is. So he's not compactly built to stand up and run support like a Tyshim Jackson might be, like we saw obviously with Bennett last year and Jamal before that. So I do think there are going to be personnel situations like where it makes more sense to rotate. And I think in the secondary in general, you see that across the board. The Mario thing was just kind of funky because like they were rotating without, like, it didn't seem like they were seeking out personnel advantages as much as it was like, we're going to rotate, which maybe keeps guys fresh, but also to your point, like maybe it also limits some of the continuity and all that stuff.
Yeah. So I wasn't really trying to directly compare those. And I think you kind of, shed some light on that. They're not the same thing, but just kind of interesting to see that they have that level of versatility there. Wanted to hit on the D line real quick, then we'll get to a little bit of offensive talk. And I think part of that is just because I'm more intrigued by the defense right now. Because Dan Lanning's a defensive head coach. There's so many pieces that they brought in. But let's talk about this defensive line. Erik, you're from Eugene. You've followed the Ducks for a long time. You've covered the Ducks for a long time. You can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I really do feel like this might be Oregon's deepest defensive line that we've seen since the Eric Armstead, DeForest Buckner days.
Yeah, that's fair. I was even thinking like compared to them, this group might be a little deeper. Because I just remember their freshman year, Alex Balducci was redshirting, and then they had a couple guys go down, and like he went from redshirting to like playing week 7 on, which is like something that and it's different rules where redshirting back then you only played one game and you burned it. But yeah, no, I think the depth here is really encouraging. I think having Popo Amavai back is something that maybe doesn't get talked about quite as much.
I just wrote a story on that, so I love that.
Yeah, because I think he's a really unique player who back in 21 when he was healthy last was pretty damn good guy. Like I thought what he can do at this size in terms of pass downs is pretty unique. So I think that's a big win, but it's not just that. I mean, they return the exception of Jordan Riley, basically everybody from last year. And again, I'm probably maybe a little bit more forgiving of this group as a whole. The Oregon State game is pretty hard to forget, but like the lack of pass rush stuff, like I think some of that you could point here. I think other places you can point that probably are more effective. And then also just acknowledge like Oregon actually got and pressured the quarterback a lot. They just weren't very good at bringing the quarterbacks down. I don't have the data in front of me, but I'm pretty sure they were like top third in the conference and actually quarterback pressures, but like second to last in sacks. So that's something that's not necessary. I mean, I guess you could say they didn't finish the play as well enough, but like they were not a group that wasn't able to at least get upfield in certain instances. But yeah, and then you add Jordan Birch. This freshman class is super exciting just from a body type perspective. Like I can't stop talking about how just huge Terrence Green is. Like I know when you were up here, like Jason Jones was like the last just huge person they brought in that was like immediately like just stood out physically at least at that position. Like Terrence Green carries 315 pounds at 6'5", better than about anybody I've seen in a really long time. Like he's probably just like if I would be one of my top guys to have if you wanted to pick a guy to walk off the bus first. Like he's just like
Intimidation
huge,
factor.
physical. Yeah, exactly.
And Tavita Pomey too. He's over 300. He's a true
Yeah,
freshman.
yeah. Tavita and Amari are both are both over 300, but they don't carry it. Like I mean, Terrence Green looks incredible. I'm just like I there are photos I've sent and posted on the website. Like I'm just really intrigued by him. Again, I don't think those true freshmen, many of them have much of an impact at all this fall, just because there are so many veterans back. But I mean, I think there's a, I think a couple things are exciting along the defensive line. I think they're going to be good this year. I think they're going to be better than they were a year ago. I mean, they better be. They return basically everybody. They bring and then they insert Popo and Jordan Birch, who are going to be probably two of your 3 or 4 best defensive linemen this year. You add Mateo, who's playing probably a little bit of defensive end, a little bit of big edge outside linebacker. Like I think those are improvements. But the thing that also gets you excited is you go, so those guys are going to eat a lot of the minutes this year. Most of those guys are gone. A lot of the guys you think are going to be the fill-ins in 24 are guys that are currently on the roster that are hopefully developing along with this nucleus of older guys. So I think it's a really nice combination. I mean, it's a huge room. I don't have the count in front of me, but if you
Tons of bodies.
If you include the outside linebackers, some of those edge guys, it's probably like close to 20 guys. But there's a lot of really young players that are really encouraging, at least from what we've heard and kind of seen physically. Like I remember Casey Rogers can't stop talking about how good Nikhil Gardner is. I think he was like the lowest or second lowest rated of any of these guys. So I mean, I'm really encouraged by kind of the two timeline almost. Like I know you're a Warrior fan. It was kind of like what the Warriors tried to do. It didn't work, so hopefully this is better. But where they had like the young contingent of players that were developing with these veteran guys. Like I'm excited by what the defensive line can be in the short and the long term. And there are certainly things that need to improve. They do need to finish plays on pass downs better. But I think this will be one of the better units that we've seen at Oregon in a minute. And certainly just from a size and physicality perspective, like, yeah, it probably is the closest thing that Oregon's had since Eric Armstead and DeForest Buckner and Balducci and all those guys were here.
Yeah, we could talk the defense for like another 20 minutes. I feel like easy, but we got to get some offensive talk in there.
Okay.
And just to kind of wrap us up a little bit as we get close to that 30-minute mark. Kind of two things that stood out to me. One of them is a little quick one, but Noah Whittington on the updated roster. I think he was either like 5'8", 5'9", but north of 200 pounds now. 5'8", 208 pounds. So his weight gain is certainly something that was notable because I think he was playing closer to 195 last year. Mm-hmm. And so that development, along with Jordan James, is getting some good talk. Burned his red shirt as a true freshman, carved out a role as a third down back, which may not seem that big for some people, but Carlos Loughlin said that was a significant role for him, especially when they were working in the 1A, 1B with Bucky and Noah. Right. So maybe we're going to see some more of Noah Whittington maybe being used a little bit differently as the proclaimed fastest back by Carlos Loughlin himself. But maybe we'll see some more of Jordan James and see him take that next step.
Yeah, I was the one who framed the question that Carlos didn't like, where he had to correct me and tell me that Jordan James did play a big role last year for a freshman because he was getting the ball in big situations, which no disagreement. I was more asking if his role grows and he's now is he in the mix with Bucky and and Noah in that contingent there. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that was a couple of things. Whittington to me physically it looks like an NFL running back. Like he kind of, it's different because of several things, but like just build wise, it's a little like Austin Eckler-y, like short, stocky, but still a lot of burst and a lot of power. I mean, I still remember that run against Colorado. Can't remember if I think I was field side for that, where he just absolutely plastered a guy going into the end zone. And it was loud. So he's got a little bit of that power, but yeah, he's also showed last year he can do a lot of other things. Like I do think Bucky gets, and rightfully so, a lot of attention because he is so unique and gifted as a ball carrier, whether it be vision's part of it, but a big part is just his feet, his agility, and his ability to
Keeping
stay
plays
up.
alive. Yeah.
I mean, it's just you go watch last year's highlights, and gosh, there's 12, 15 plays where you're just like, man, that's next level stuff. That's like because so much of the running back position, right, is like hit the hole, get up field, and that's just like what you're looking to do. Like what Bucky does, it's kind of like wins above replacement or whatever in baseball, where you're like, what's the average person going to do on this play? I feel
Mhm.
like Bucky exceeds expectations so much because sure, he hits the hole and does the right thing, but then when he's faced with having to make somebody like the next move, he almost wins every time on those, like, and creates an extra 3 or 5 yards, or sometimes he breaks a couple tackles, and it's like against BYU, it was what, like an extra 20 yards, almost scores on that long one. So, I mean, I love both those guys. I'm incredibly intrigued by Jordan. I thought it was also interesting how like Lachlan had some interesting quotes about the true freshmen and how they're not put him in a microwave. They need to put him in the oven and take some time. So maybe we have to pump the brakes on the Dante Dowdell and Jaden Lamar excitement. But both those guys look physically ready, and they're both listed, I think, at two. I think Lamar was like 5'11", 200, and Dowdell was what 6'2", 215, I think. Like those are guys who physically at least can play, but based upon what Lachlan is saying, like they might not. Like maybe it is just those three guys, and maybe you look to redshirt one or both of the other two. So, like I think it's a room that's really talented, and you're right. I think the question to me becomes, yeah, is it really just the 2-man backfield primarily? Because those guys did have, I think I did the stats, like 75% of the running back carries last
Mhm.
year. Or does Jordan James throw his name in there, and does he start carrying the ball, in different situations? Like I think that's to me kind of the question that I had that Carlos wasn't really ready to answer directly.
Well, we know the running backs are going to be just crazy good. I mean, it's always loaded in Eugene at that position. We are over the 30-minute mark, Eric. I was hoping to get one more topic out
Yeah,
of you. Is that
we
all
can,
right?
we can do a couple more if you want. I don't got a whole lot going.
Okay, cool. Well, let's keep it rolling. Sticking with some offense, try to balance this bad boy out a little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah, yeah,
Um, I'm really intrigued with what this offensive line group is going to look like
yeah.
because you find yourself in a really unique situation if you're Erik Terry, who makes his return to Eugene after serving on staff with Mario Cristobal, spending some time in the NFL. Now it's his second time with his own room after coaching at Hawaii, and you find yourself replacing what I think a lot of people would consider one of the best offensive lines Oregon's ever had,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
in terms of production, keeping Bo Nix upright last year. And you're also in an interesting spot because you don't have Adrian Clem anymore. And this is a group that I think enters the season with a tremendous amount of expectation just for that room. And then certainly from a coaching standpoint with Erik Terry filling in for Adrian Clem now. But the cupboard's not bare. It is not bare at all. You have Josh Connolly Jr., who is probably looking like your left tackle to keep Bo Nix upright, protects his blind side, who had a really solid freshman campaign and wasn't even necessarily really like a full-time starter. He had
No.
that 14J formation where he was
Yeah.
featured heavily, but you have him coming back. You have Jackson Powers Johnson, who may be pulling away a little bit at center. We don't really know yet. Marcus Harper is also in that discussion. And then you have Stephen Jones. So you have a lot of guys who have played a decent amount of football for you, but then you go into the portal and you get Junior Angalau, who looks like he is pretty close to full health. I want to say you can maybe check me on that one. And then a Johnny Cornelius, who might have been the most coveted tackle in the entire transfer portal. And then I feel like you kind of had a little bit of a last minute luxury addition with Nashad Struther coming over from East Carolina. So I am super curious to see how this group shakes out and what those starting five ultimately look like.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of similar to defensive back where you've got some guys back, but you went out and were so aggressive in adding players from the portal that there are players that I think probably right after the season ended and before some of the moves were made, you figured like felt like Marcus Harper was like a sure thing to be starting this year after he played pretty darn well in Stephen Jones's place last year. Well, I don't know. I would be really surprised at this point if he has a starting job. I don't really see where it comes from because Anguilao and Struther are both just as, I mean, they've got more experience. They both are 3-year starters. And Strother was graded out really, really well at his time at East Carolina. Very different body type than a lot of these guys. And he's like 6'2", 320 pounds. He's a pretty stout guy, but I'm not convinced Marcus Harper is a starter. I mean, more likely he's your backup center and probably your first guard or second guard off the bench, because you also have to recognize like Stephen Jones is back, and that's a guy who's got a ton of starting experience, and he's probably your starting right guard. And if he's your, like, just to talk you through this, like, this is how I see things right now, and I might be wrong on some of this. My guess from left to right, the starting five is something like Connerly, Strother, JPJ, Jones, Cornelius, something like that. Well, Harper and Anguilau's name, I didn't mention either of them, and that is kind of where I'm at. Of like, I don't know. Maybe Jones doesn't start. Maybe Anguilao is ahead of him. Harper, maybe he pushes Strother or pushes JPJ. So like, there is still this, to the point you made earlier about who's going to be the starting five. Like, that's my best guess. Again, I'm not in there watching them do. I haven't watched them do a single 11-on-11 drill. I haven't seen them line up. I don't really have a sense of how they're working. Really, I've heard some things, but like, it's intriguing. It's interesting, and I think the exciting part is, how many times almost every year you see a guy miss at least a handful of games on the offensive line, right?
Sure.
Alex Forsythe is always out. We talked about Stephen Jones, like Brian Walk last year. They've got a bunch of guys now. Like they are, I don't want to say completely, set up,
Yeah.
but like they do have like 7, 8 guys probably, and then there's some young guys that are like people. I think it was Brandon Dorless said that Iapani Lalu, Feope's younger brother, is the most athletic player on the team. And this is a true freshman interior lineman who's probably not any better than your third string guy at this point. But like, that's intriguing. I heard so many positive things about Dave Iuli in spring, where I was like kind of fiddling with the idea maybe he'd start, and then they brought in Strother, and Anguilau's healthy, and it's just like, oh, he's probably farther down there. So there's a lot on the offensive line, and while it's not a group that's played it together at all, and several of these guys haven't started at Oregon before, like, it's a group that, like, I think eventually could be really, really good. And the part that excites me the most are the tackles. There's all that uncertainty at guard, but like you mentioned earlier, could like this defensive line be one of the more deep defensive lines in a long time? Like, I think those could be the most athletic, at least, 2 offensive tackles Oregon has ever had. Like, Josh Connerly is a freak with how he moves. And Johnny Cornelius isn't far behind. So you've got 2 very, very athletic offensive tackles. So, and then you've got a bunch of guys on the interior that we've talked about already. And once they find whatever the right kind of match is and kind of the fit for everything is, like, I think they'll be pretty darn good. I don't think you'll be seeing them right out of the gate, seamlessly jump out there and look awesome. Like, it could take all of non-conference play, a couple games in conference play. Maybe it's not until they get out of that bye week after, I think it's after Stanford, where they really hit the ground running. But I think the upside's really, really high. But again, like I said, on defensive back positions, like, there's just a lot of question marks of like how it all fits together, which is fun. But like, at this time of year, you'd like to have the certainty that these are the guys, but we don't.
Yeah, and I feel like, Oregon's at a good spot, right? You're in the midway point in fall camp. I'm sure that Alik Terry, Mike Kavanaugh, Cutter Leftwich, they're all saying similar things to what we're saying right now. And to your point, talking about how Marcus Harper might not even be a starter, I can't help but feel for him a little bit, because he filled in great last year after Stephen Jones went down. But the fact that we're shifting these pieces around, and he might not be a starter. And Stephen Jones might even get, kind of leapfrogged, for lack of a better phrase, by some of these portal guys is crazy. And I think it speaks to, if you're Alik Terry, you couldn't really ask for a better situation here, coming into returning, but, a new responsibility, right? A newer member of the coaching staff. You're not in a position where you're working with a bunch of puppies that haven't played a lot of football. You're working with experienced guys. Now it's just a matter of, how do you find that right combination that kind of works the best and hums the best along the offensive line? Because we know if that doesn't get figured out, this offense isn't going anywhere. But I don't think that's a concern. It's more of a good problem to have if you're looking in the trenches right now.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, let's talk about the tight end spot a bit, because that's another group that is kind of more of a question mark. I don't want to use that term too much, but it really is, because this group underwent a whole lot of change in the course of the offseason. You had Terrence Ferguson, who was obviously the leader at that position last year. And maybe Maliki Matavao and Cam McCormick kind of flew under the radar, or were maybe a little bit underappreciated because they didn't get the ball a whole lot, but they both hit the portal. Maliki ends up at UCLA. Cam McCormick follows Cristobal to Miami. And now if you're a Duck fan, you're looking at yourself like, shoot, we don't have a whole lot of depth here. And the pieces that they did bring in, Ludwig and Casey Kelly from the transfer portal, they're hopefully going to complement projected starters Terrence Ferguson and Patrick Herbert. But we still don't really know what we're going to get from this group. And we haven't even talked about Kenyon Sadiq, who was a pretty freaky athlete out of Idaho, but maybe a bit undersized upon his arrival.
Yeah, no, it's another one. I mean, again, that's going to be I think the common kind of if we get to receive, like, quarterback, we feel good. I know quarterback. I feel
finally.
We find a position I feel good about. I feel good about a lot of these, but that I'm confident about the hierarchy at least. Yeah, I mean, tight end. I mean, so Drew Maringer spoke on Wednesday, so yesterday, and one of the things I was curious was, last year they really did rotate 4 guys. I don't know if fans realize with the frequency that they rotated, but they had 4 guys who played more than 200 snaps last year. And, you do the math on that. That's like 15, 20 snaps per game for all those guys. Patrick Herbert played the least at like 219. I think Ferguson played the most. I was just looking earlier today. It was like a little over 400. But Cam McCormick and Maliki Matavao are right there. And actually, McCormick and Matavao started 6 games each. Ferguson started 6 games. They had 3 guys that were kind of pseudo alpha, pseudo top guys. Well, two of those guys are gone. And my question to Maringer was, you guys rotated with 4 last year. Like, do you have the bodies and the group to do it this year? And he basically said, we've got 3 we know are capable because of the playing experience. And that's Ferguson, that's Herbert, and that's Casey Kelly coming over from Ole Miss, where he played quite a bit. I don't have the snap counts in front of me, but he was borderline he started some games.
More of a blocker too.
Yeah, more of a blocker. So who's the 4th guy? And the 4th guy would be Kenyon Sadiq. But to Drew's point, like, it's a different animal. And while I love I don't know where he was for you in terms of favorite film you watched for that 23 class for Oregon, but Kenyon's is near the top for me. I just loved watching him play and the highlights that he had out in Idaho. And of course, competition is very different. But he was also playing out wide from a lot of it. He wasn't a tight end really. I think his senior year he focused on a little bit more, but to start in high school, he thought he was playing, more of an outside receiver role. So he has to figure out some of these fundamental things. And so that was kind of the point that Drew made, which was like, we'd like to be at 4. We think we could get there, but Kenyon's kind of got to have to step his game up a little bit. We'll see what he can do. Cause while everybody wants to get excited by the true freshman, I think sometimes we forget how hard it is to actually play college football when you're 18 or 19 years old. So that's the challenge for Kenyon. I think physically he's 6'3", 235. So he is still on the smaller side, but I mean, I've always seen him more of kind of in a, Georgia used Darnell Washington and Brock Bowers and sometimes, a couple other guys, but those guys complemented each other because you had Washington, who was just like the biggest human being on the field, and then Bowers, who could do all sorts of things with the football. Like, I'm not saying Sadiq is Brock Bowers because that's really, really lofty expectations, but I think that's kind of the role they hope he assumes at some point. I'm not convinced that's this year, but and that's kind of the point is it might be a year where you really do see them lean on those 3 veteran guys, and maybe Sadiq gets out there in certain packages and flashes, and maybe his role grows as the year goes on. But kind of my sense talking to Drew yesterday was like, yeah, we feel really good about the 3 guys that have the experience, but Sadiq is going to have to prove himself. And the other thing is they've got like 6, 7 walk-on tight ends who are all new players I don't really know much about. Probably 1 or 2 of those guys is going to have to at least position himself to be not a contributor, but to be a guy who's kind of that next man up if a player goes down, because, Caden Ludwig would be probably the most logical one as a transfer who was, I think, on scholarship at Colorado, but my understanding is he's not at Oregon. But still, like at some point, you've got to feel like 1 or 2 of these walk-on guys is like able to give you something in a pinch. And I have no feel for what that looks like at this point.
Yeah, so it's an interesting discussion because you have some guys that are there that can do something for you, but at the same time, if you were to just head into if the season started right now, you have 3 guys that you're feeling confident with, you could be looking at the possibility of being a little bit limited in terms of what you're able to do from a play calling position with Will Stein. So it's going to be a work in progress. Ludwig was a linebacker, I think, coming out of high school, and might have even been focusing on that at Colorado. So still have to see how that one pans out. The last question I want to or area I want to explore, Erik, on this, we might have talked about it the last time I brought you on, but it's been a little while. I just wanted to point to and discuss the roster overhaul from a broad standpoint, because I think that is really indicative of where the sport is at right now in the era of the transfer portal. But also, I think it's gonna really pay off in terms of helping Dan Lanning, helping this coaching staff close that gap in terms of getting to the team that they need to be to achieve some of these lofty goals, like a Pac-12 title, a New Year's Six bowl, or even getting back to the playoff.
It's such a weird time.
It really is.
For a lot of, there's so many moving parts here, and you can point to 4 or 5 things that have played big roles into the sport changing a lot. But I mean, just the fact of the matter is like, it's kind of like what you're seeing on men's basketball at Oregon, where Oregon fans are always like, we don't really know the team because it's a new team every year. I'm not saying Oregon fans aren't excited about this team, but let's be real, you don't really know your team yet, and typically you go into a year with like, oh, we've got 55 returners or whatever, 60 returners. It's just the recruiting class and maybe a couple of players coming in. Like, it's like half the roster is new this year. I mean, it wasn't on last year's team. That's just different. It's strange, but it also, to your point, I do agree that it's giving Dan Lanning an opportunity to expedite the process of making the roster his own, and to your point, to potentially position them more quickly to be the type of team he wants, to get the kind of linebackers he's looking for, to go, hey, we didn't like maybe the certain players we had at this position group that I inherited. Let's go retool it like he did at linebacker. Like he tried to do at corner. Like we haven't talked about receiver, but they added 3 receivers there. They had to rehaul a lot of the offensive line. Like a lot of these position groups just look a lot different, in part because players left, but some of those players left because I think Oregon was pretty okay with them leaving because they wanted different players that fit better. So, there's pros and cons for Dan. I think that the pro is, I think the team is in a better shape now than it was when he inherited it. I would think most fans would agree. The con, and it's not a big one for Dan necessarily, but from a I guess expectations perspective or how the season will be viewed, he doesn't have the built-in excuse of, oh, I don't have my players, because there's really not very many Mario Cristobal players left on this roster. Like if you were to go through the 2 deep, I'll just try to do the exercise in my head, like Troy Franklin, Terrence Ferguson, Jackson Powers Johnson. Those are the only guys in the offense that were Mario recruits. And then you go defense. There's a couple more there. You got Popo's, and Popo might have been like a Taggart recruit.
Chris Hudson too.
Chris Hudson, yeah, good call there. But yeah, you see my point. Like it's like 4 or 5 of the guys that are starting. You have to kind of think through and go, there's so many. So, I mean, that's the other part is, well, if this doesn't work out, like he kind of has to eat it because it's the way he wanted to build this team, and I remain really confident it will work out. But that's the other part here, and what you have to get used to as a college football fan is like this looks a lot more like what Dan Lanning wanted, a lot quicker than I think a lot of us expected. And I'm really confident that's going to pay dividends, but I guess we'll kind of see. We'll see what obviously he's had a vision and he's gone out and been very, very specific and intentional with how he's gone about putting this together. But we don't know yet. And we'll see when the games are played this fall, how much success they've actually had in overhauling this thing. Cause I think it's pretty clear, just if you just want to look at the offense and the defense under Mario and now under Dan, I think a lot of different philosophies of what they tried to get accomplished in a lot of different ways. And Dan has built this team the way he wants it to. And now we're going to have to see how it actually works and how it unfolds. I'm really excited for it, but Dan can't, there's no way he can hide behind, I'm using it's the other guy's players.
And that's, I think, never say that. No one's going to say that.
He would never say that, but the fans talking about it, if they could rationalize like, we only won 8 games this year, 9 games. Well, it was all Mario's guys. You really can't say that. These are Dan's guys. And then the other point is he's going to be celebrated even more if they win 11 or 12 games, because it's going to be, look what he can do with his guys. So, it'll be an interesting season from that perspective.
And I think Oregon finds themselves, as does a majority of college football, in the position where you're not rebuilding, you're reloading, retooling on a year-to-year basis. And that's certainly what's happening in Eugene. I just had the image in my head as we kind of get closer to the season in a couple of weeks. And, we kind of have to see what this team looks like.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like I'm imagining it or liking it to like a parent, like letting go of their kid when they're like not having the training wheels anymore on a bike. I don't know if that's a good image or not, but it kind of seemed like something that could be a workable, comp here as we really don't know what this team looks like in a couple of pretty important areas. But it's not in terms of like, man, it could be really bad. It's just we don't know what that potential ultimately looks like because we haven't seen the tape.
But in your hypothetical, Max, how are you envisioning the writing for the kid going? Is he like falling over immediately, or does he keep pedaling? That's the question.
Yeah, I think keep pedaling. I think you could see maybe looking a little wobbly at the start in terms
wobbles,
of the offensive line kind of trying to gel and Oregon shooting themselves in the foot, which seems like a trademark of the team over the past couple of years. But I think, ultimately, I think we could definitely see the kid riding pretty smoothly if this thing works out. And I think that there's certainly reason to think that it will.
Yeah, let's just hope there's not any flat tires. Can't have any flat tires.
Yeah, don't want any of those. But yeah, Eric, I've kept you long enough. I could keep going, but before we get out of here, do me a favor and let the people know where they can find more of you and the work that you're doing around the Ducks.
Yeah, so duckterritory.com. We are the 24/7 sports affiliate for Oregon. Myself, Jared Matt Preem. We cover the Ducks, I think, as well as just about anybody in terms of the team coverage. We certainly have the largest contingent of people out there. We run 3 deep along with a photographer for basically everything. Odds and Audibles podcast is worth checking out. I guess it's a competing podcast to this one, but I will say it's better because I'm on it, because I guess I'm a narcissist and that's how we do this. I don't know. But yeah, no, me, Jared, and Matt do, I think, a good job with the pod as well. We had one go up earlier today where we were kind of running through some of the things we're excited about joining the Big Ten, which we haven't really talked about here today, but that's another podcast for another time. And we've had some great guests come on over the last year or so. We had Dan Lanning on the podcast, which was a blast. So definitely go check that stuff out. But really just check out duckterritory.com. We've got a special running right now if you want to subscribe.
All right. There you go. Well, you guys make sure you tap in with Erik. I definitely root for him from afar as someone who definitely helped me with my transition into the industry, and just a great guy. And of course, as I said in the beginning, a Zag. Can never find too many of those. They're all great. But if you guys want to find more of me, make sure you tap in with me on Twitter and Instagram at mtorresports. If you're here on YouTube, subscribe to the channel at Oregon Football Max Torres. It is tremendous help. And then you can read all my written coverage of the Ducks over on ducksdigest.com. But until next time, appreciate you guys stopping by, taking some time to talk some ball. Thanks to Erik for coming on, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Ducks Dish